Hello everybody, and welcome to this video on tips and tricks for designing your assessment pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through a few hints and tips that I find really useful when you're thinking about putting together your first assessment piece. Obviously once you've done one, you apply the same principle to them all. You'll all do it at some point, so whether that's skill stage 2, skill stage 3, skill stage 4, it will happen to all of them. And to be honest, even across the skill levels, it's actually very similar, and we're looking for the same sort of thing, so it's quite easy to incorporate all the skill levels into a presentation like this. I'm going to cover it in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to look at, because design doesn't just necessarily stop the moment you start to make, I will also sort of consider some of the things that you might do or need to do to adjust the design while you're actually working on the piece as well. So there'll be a couple of different aspects to it. I will go on at a later date, so you'll find a video at a later date that will actually take you through the process of making and documenting the piece itself and what we would expect you to do as sort of backup for that piece. So that will come a little bit later on, but for today I'm just concentrating on how you would go about designing it. So before I go a great deal further, it's worth just saying a word or two about timing. As you can appreciate, with the different skill levels all being in the same cohort and the same groups, it can be quite difficult to time exactly when each level would be approaching designing a piece. So we've done it a little bit earlier because we're thinking that some of the skill stage 2s will already be getting up to that point, but we do appreciate that some of you on the skill stage 3 and 4 will not yet likely be there, but still, you know, the video will still be there for you. If you want to look back at that stage, you know, you can look back on it then. So the first thing that you should be doing is looking at writing yourself a design brief, and it should contain the who, the what and the where for your planned piece. That tells you quite a lot about the piece. So for example, if somebody says to you that I want a wall hanging for my conservatory which is decorated in blues and I have an interest in the sea, then you already know a great deal from that. You know what your parameters are for that design. You will know obviously the size, because there will be presumably a blank space on the wall, or they will know where they're going to hang it. You'll know something about them, something about their personal interests or what they would like that piece to portray, and you'll also know what it's going to be used for, because in knowing what it's going to be used for, you can then make decisions about, do I need to use washable materials, do I need to use childproof materials, and etc. So first job is to develop your design brief, because that lets you know a great deal about what should be included and what shouldn't be included within your final piece. For me, the next task would be to consider options. So there are all sorts of ways you can do that, of course. You know, you can look at books, you can look at magazines, you can look online. But the best way I've found of doing it more recently is by putting my search term, so for example, embroidered wall hanging, into Google and switching to the images tab at the top, and you will get a whole sort of montage of photographs similar to the ones that you can see in the slide. Some will be not at all interesting to you. You know, you'll think, oh, that's dreadful, or it'll be something that's you know, commercially made, but within those you will get some real little gems. See, this is a great tool for narrowing down what you want, what you don't want, and also formulating why that might be. Is it because it's too traditional? Is it because you don't like the colours, because you're not keen on the techniques? So it's a good way of getting a lot of images that you can have a reaction to, and then try gradually to figure out why that was and narrow down what you think could be a plan going forward. Once you've decided on what your actual piece is going to look like by a process of elimination, then you can start and concentrate on the specifics. So for example, what colour scheme would you like? Or your client like, depending on who you're doing it for. And within that, you can produce alternatives. I have lots of students say to me, oh well, you know, my client or I have a conservatory that's all done in pinks, therefore I want something that's pink. So they'll only do one colourway or one suggestive colourway, but of course you can mix pinks in all sorts of different ways. You can have more light, more dark, more towards the raspberry, more towards the red. So even if you have quite a set colour scheme, you can still play with the percentages within that, and to an extent with the colour range as well. I'd really expect to see you develop 3 possible colourways that might work for your piece. And following on from that, I'd also expect you to look at construction ideas. I personally find that walking around somewhere like IKEA is a great sort of thought provoker for me. That might be the right word, thought provoker. You can look at what can be some really simple, interesting construction, and of course you can do that on the internet as well. You don't actually need to go to IKEA. But try and think out of the box. Have a look at, if you've decided, for example, to do a lampshade, have a look at the lampshade construction, think how you might be able to do it differently. So try to think of something that's a little bit unusual, a bit novel, just because things have been done like that, or you've seen them done like that for quite a while, doesn't mean to say that you always have to follow the traditional or the norm. Next thing that you will need to do is to think about how that piece actually comes together. So you'll be basing it on some of your own design work, but you may have to adjust that, as we discussed in a previous video. So if, for example, you're doing a square cushion and you have an oblong design, then you might have to do some adjustment to your design before you actually use it. It might be that you have to make the, if it's got motifs on, that you might have to make them smaller, make them larger, in order to get a really good fit. And you're considering your technique as well. So I remember a little while ago having a student that did a cutwork top to a box, and she literally tried to just shrink the design down so that she had a cutwork design that was for a tablecloth onto the top of a box. That's far too fiddly. You know, it's just not feasible to do that. So you need something that will, not only will it work, will it actually be derived from your own design work, but equally whatever technique you choose, you need to think about, is this the optimum size for the technique I'm choosing? Is it going to work? Is it going to fit? Can I do it? And the only way to find out about that is to do some sampling. It might be that you had your heart set on velvet, but velvet doesn't work because it's quite bulky and you can't get a good finish. The only way actually to find out is to sample a little bit. Don't need to be big samples, but you do need to have a try at both materials, threads, yarns, whatever it might be, to make sure, does this fit, does this work? And when you're happy that it does, you need to produce yourself a set of templates or drawings or a plan of some kind to show your tutor, so it's good enough that she knows exactly what you're going to do and she can comment on it effectively, but also to work from yourself. So it needs to be scaled so that you understand at what scale you're working to, and you know, you can understand completely where you're going from the set of instructions that you've made yourself, and so could anybody else that happens to pick them up. So I would always say, if you are confident that if you didn't make that and another craftsperson came in, picked up those set of templates or drawings or instructions, is there enough detail in there that they could see how you intended it to work out and that they could actually make it from those instructions? So that to me is that the benchmark. Could somebody else make it if you didn't? Just a quick word of caution here. I've just been talking through the sort of planning process that I would expect you would have to go through to plan one of your assessment pieces. Please don't shortcut it. I know sometimes it's tempting, but unfortunately, in my experience, generally it backfires. If you don't know where you're going at the beginning, you're most unlikely to get anywhere that's particularly attractive by the end of it. You really, apart from the fact that you will need to show that planning to your tutor before you go ahead, for your own sake, you really do need to make sure that you know that you've worked out the snags before you start as much as you can do, and that you know exactly where you're going. Shortcutting that planning process is just going to leave you tearing your hair out at the end of it, because you'll be so frustrated with the whole process. Okay, so once you've actually started, the design process doesn't stop. Obviously you hope that you've got most of it under control, because if you've done your planning properly beforehand, then you should have. But you will likely need to make adjustments as you progress. If you don't readjust your plans and your piece at that stage, then you risk compromising the entire piece going forward. So it is important to constantly ask yourself, is this working out the way I'd hoped? Is something stopping it? Is there something I can do to actually adjust that will help that process? I think I've said this quite a number of times in these videos, but it's best not to work on something if you're tired and grumpy. It will not go right. You will be, if you're tired and grumpy to start with, you'll be tearing your hair out at the end of it. So don't work on a piece when you are feeling a bit low. Do something else, come back to it, and make a start when you're feeling more upbeat. Okay. So something else that really does bear consideration is the finish that you're going to put on the piece. So those are things like how you hem it, how you edge it, any sort of decoration that you might do during that process of finishing it off. If you're putting a zip in it, how you treat the edges, how you make sure they don't fray, all that sort of thing. These are the things, these details are the things that make or break a piece. Just making a really lovely bit of patchwork for the middle, but not finishing it off properly, leaving it with fraying edges, or not taking the trouble sometimes to just give a thoughtful finish, maybe a finish that is specific to that cushion. So in other words, if you've dyed or treated some fabric to make it with, then why not put some threads in to your dye bath as well, if that's what you're going to do, and make sure that they're exactly the right colour to make either some cording or some tassels or whatever to finish it off. So it doesn't necessarily need to be complicated, but it does need to be a good finish. Don't forget to photograph your piece as you progress through it, so that you're documenting the process of making it as you go along. Don't forget to record as you're going along the time that it's taken, roughly. I mean, you don't need to be to the second. The cost, and obviously if there's anything specific, I know we give you generic health and safety, but if there's something specific, you know, for example, have you used a soldering iron, for instance, have you used a particular type of paint or dye, make sure that you include details for anything unusual that may have health and safety implications. Then you've got all of that ready to go when you make up your presentation. So I think that's about all I've got to say on that. I really hope that that's been helpful. Thank you very much for joining me for this video today.